Колеги, доброго дня.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to start our briefing, and I like even the title of it, The Results of Season, because we cooperate with USAID, and each time we need to invent some title to name our style of cooperation, and it's the third season this time. We usually make tours from September to March, and I'd say that this time it has been quite, the atmosphere in which we worked has been quite warm and hearty, and we have been implementing the many projects that we won in a contest, and today we would like to listen to our colleagues who started, who worked in Mariupol and the other regions in the southeast of Ukraine. So we have Natalya Kapustnikova today with us, who is a curator of a museum, director of the Mariupol Museum of Local Lore. And it's Donetsk region, as you know. I would like to ask her whether there have been any positive changes.
Наш проект відбувся. Ми
Ms. Kapustnikova starts by thanking Mr. Maruschak for his and the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center's efforts. Mr. Maruschak is the artistic director of the UCMC. Ms. Kapustnikova says that the discussion of this museum project has been very important. We have defined the scope of our work. We have managed to discuss our ideas of establishing a museum with a lot of prominent personalities in our region, and we are planning for April an exhibition in our town that are supposed to cooperate with us. We have also met some of the members of the academia who supported us in developing a project in a scientifically sound manner. So there was also another focus group with whom we discussed, with the members of whom we discussed this project, and this exhibition that we are planning, it would start in Mariupol University, and then it will travel all over the region. Therefore, I can say that a lot of work has already been done, and we are going to continue working on this project. Thank you, Natalya. I know that the links and transmissions of UCMC are usually viewed and followed by a lot of people, but I want to say a few words about this project of the museum in Mariupol. It's going to be a renovation and refurbishing probably of a museum in Mariupol that next year will accomplish 100 years. And I think that Natalya was very active in, raising this problem, because a lot of museums all over Ukraine experience funding problems, and Mariupol Museum, which is in essence an ethnographic museum. They have the employees of the museum. They have been quite active in exploring the ideas and the feelings of the local residents in Mariupol, what they feel, how they feel about the restoration and renovation and probably expansion of the museum, ethnographic museum. And the reaction has been quite interesting on the part of the residents of the town of Mariupol. The very idea of discussing this project of museum restoration with the locals was a novel idea, I would say, because even in Kiev you could probably haven't heard about any similar discussions with the public of any of these museum maintenance problems. So, thank you very much, Natalya, for your presentation of this idea of the restoration of Ukrainian ethnography, as Ms. Kapustnikova put it, museum. And I think that your project would be a success, and the work you have already done would not be in vain. Thank you, Natalya. I would also like to point out that the ethnography specialists from our town, they wrote a joint letter to the mayor of our town. And we know that some of the members of the academic community of our town would also like and are planning probably to write a letter, similar letter, in support of our project to the mayor of Mariupol. We hope that it's going to be a success. It will be a success, and if you need our assistance, we are ready to do that. And so your efforts, the UCMC efforts, have been conducive to what we hope would be a success of our project. So thank you, Natalya. Thank you again, and our best regards to your colleagues and activists of museum work in your town. So let us move further along the map of the Donbass region. Mariupol was one of the towns, but we have we divided Donbass area into a number of areas. Mariupol was one of them. And it's, as you know, an area adjacent to or located at the shores of the Sea of Azov. And they were thinking of how to better, so to say, include the Mariupol area, the town of Mariupol and its area on the cultural map, so to say. You could see now our another colleague, and you could see behind him the logo saying Bilovodsk, and it says Bilovodsk is the capital of horse breeding farms. Bilovodsk is practically is located in the middle of the oblast of Luhansk, and it's the steppe area, speaking geographically. So since the 18th century, the farms that where the horses were bred started to be established. So not far from Bilovodsk, there is Streletsk horse breeding farm, and after the Second World War, that farm was reorganized, so to say, and it hadn't been horse breeding before. So Bilovodsk now, we can say, is sort of a local capital of this horse breeding business. We thank you for your application for support and funding. I think that it was very successful. We, less than a month ago, presented a project for that area, and for me, when I was during that visit to Bilovodsk, it was a revelation of how close to their hearts people took this opportunity, this project of restoring and expanding the horse breeding business in that area. People were very emotional about it, and the question is how to develop this business better, so that we here from Kiev or from people from the other parts of Ukraine could go to that area and visit that area. You could see the photograph in the background of a horse named Kaketlivi, and this statue is at the entrance to Novoaidar's farm, and this farm workers, employees, decorate every year this horse, painting him in different colors. It's a local tradition that I wanted to share with you, says Mr. Maruschak. And Mr. Maruschak emphasizes that he did not even think before visiting Bilovodsk that he would like that area so much. So he invites now the representative of Bilovodsk to inform the public about the changes, positive transformations of the enlarged community after that decentralization reform and the so-called amalgamation of the communities, when a number of townships and villages were united in larger administrative units. As far as we can hear, Mikhailo Yakovich from Bilovodsk, what he's saying, it's unfortunately it's this Skype link, not good sound quality. But the idea is that he felt that he and his colleagues, they felt the need to promote the development of farms where horses could be bred. And he emphasizes the rich cultural heritage and legacy of Bilovodsk, and it had been visited before the revolution, so-called October Revolution of 1917. It had been visited by a number of dignitaries because people liked horses, and they were buying horses of well-bred horses, of different breeds. And so he hopes that there would be a breakthrough in reviving this business, horse breeding business and the farms. And he also hopes that undertaking this, so to say, diplomatic even initiative, diplomacy, public diplomacy, this aim of reviving the farms, horse breeding farms, would be a success. And so, as you heard from a lady representing Mariupol, we also have similar aims of reviving our cultural legacy and heritage, combining it with good business opportunities. What he says is that some time ago, they organized in Luhansk an association in support of the revival of different museums and I think he says that it was very good that this initiative involved or brought rather to brought to a new level the level of awareness of the local communities, of the awareness of cultural legacy and heritage. It was a non-for-profit museum that they wanted to restore first, and the members of the local community started participating actively in these efforts to restore probably the ethnographic museum, but also he says there is also a national park that we also want to revive, and he says the idea is to include these horse breeding farms into the large cultural and ethnographic preserves in Luhansk area. We can discuss our future plans for hours, he says. But let me conclude by saying that UCMC is a good team and it's a very good organization that we appreciate your support very much. Yeah, you were right, says Mr. Maruschak, that even a few hours would not be enough to discuss all the aspects of this very good cause. But let me say that in April you would publish some photographs or you supply us the photographs so that we could put them on our website on how you celebrated Easter. I would also like to say, says Mr. Maruschak, that Bilovodsk area is a very well-developed area in terms of agriculture and natural resources. As compared to the neighboring Severodonetsk, where the chemical industry is very developed. In Bilovodsk, you can find tremendous rich of abundance of natural resources. And so they have a totally different industrial or rather agricultural environment. Thank you, Gennady Yakovlevich, once again. Give our best to your colleagues. If you are ever in Kiev, please visit us here at UCMC. We continue our discussion. So we visited practically the southern part of Donbass and northern part of Donbass. And now let us get to the central part of the Donbass. It's Druzhkivka. And it's a township in which a ceramic factory was established yet in the 19th century. They produce china and porcelain products. And so what is the difference, for example, between porcelain and china? It's practically the same, the meaning is practically the same, just two terms used or originated in different areas. And Druzhkivka factory is the only one surviving factory producing China in Ukraine. Previously, there were about a dozen of them, but this is the only one that has survived these 25 years of independence of Ukraine and economic difficulties accompanying it. And the factory there has not only a wonderful collection of pottery there, but it's also a collection that we can describe as a collection of great masters of that craft. This collection is all well preserved in the town, and we can practically speak about a brand, a certain brand of pottery and china products, works of this China manufacture. And if you ever see some of the magnificent art products, you would never doubt whether to buy or not to buy something similar. Muzeum Druzhkivka was selected by us due to the efforts of certain Miss Moller, who is our colleague, and says Mr. Maruschak, and he is describing now this loss of the cultural legacy and industrial legacy and craftsman heritage and legacy. And the museum is, in this respect, probably the only place where this cultural heritage, that includes Soviet time heritage and even previous periods of time, could be accumulated and researched. In Druzhkivka Museum, there is a catalog. They published recently a catalog of pottery that they have accumulated through the years. I cannot yet see Miss Svitlana, who is supposed to talk to us via a Skype link, but let us try to talk to her. Miss Svitlana, hello. Yes, says Miss Svitlana, I'm glad to hear you. Ms. Svitlana says, continues Mr. Maruschak, we would like to hear from you what have the changes been since we published a PDF format catalog of your works of art and craft. Ms. Svitlana says, thanks. Mr. Maruschak, Svitlana Krivonosova, who is the director of Druzhkivka History and Art Museum. She thanks Mr. Maruschak for UCMC efforts, and she continues by saying that due to this catalog and these efforts at reviving cultural traditions, these works of art, they has gained the second life, so to say. The public started seeing them again. And after that, there were a number of private persons who voluntarily offered their collections of pottery to the museum. And one of the ladies who offered her collection recently, she studied. She was from Western Ukraine originally, and she came to the Donbass from Western Ukraine. She studied at Ivano-Frankivsk and lived in Lvov, and but she worked for the most of her life in the east of Ukraine, and she created unique works, says Miss Krivonosova. And thank you, she says, to Mr. Maruschak for your assistance, for enabling us to preserve the works of all those masters of art who put their individuality, their individual style in their work. If not for these efforts, we would have lost these works of art, these traditions, artistic traditions. And again, thank you, Mr. Maruschak, for your assistance, because without your assistance, it would all be difficult, would have been difficult or it would be difficult to preserve. Mr. Maruschak continues by saying that the colorless China style is mostly the arts in that style are mostly manufactured at Druzhkivka, and there, for example, at Druzhkivka, you could see Vasilenko's pane made of porcelain. And it's dedicated to Lesa Ukrainka's works. Lesa Ukrainka was a poetess of the 19th century. Mr. Maruschak continues by saying that he hopes that there would be a new catalogue published dedicated and including the works of art that they have at Druzhkivka Museum of Pottery. Another project that I would like to familiarize you with is the one that was done at Novoaidar. It's one of the examples of our effort to visualize the results of work of the last decades, few last decades. The museum that they have there is what is called a complex museum, so it combines different realms of art, so to say, and local life. For almost, or rather about 20 years ago, the museum started also doing some research work, researching also how the Novoaidarsk area was populated. And they started also doing their research through the research of clothes, different costumes, national and local, and so on. And they created a map of the people who populated the nowadays Novoaidarsk area, which is a part of Luhansk Oblast or region. And mostly these were the people from Russia. But the exact information was lacking about the information about from which areas, from which regions of Russia. For example, it was learned through that research that some group or category of population called Lemki, it's one of the regions in the Carpathian Mountains, some of them were relocated into this Novoaidarsk area. And I have not prepared any visual pictures, says Mr. Maruschak, because he said that he didn't expect so many people to participate in this link. But hopefully and luckily, he says, we have a number of experts with whom we can link via Skype. And there are two ladies on the screen, and Mr. Maruschak continues by saying that we are happy to talk to you, and we think that your work has been a success, even in the difficult conditions of the independence of Ukraine and economic difficulties that Ukraine has experienced in the last 25 years. You managed to present your academic work, your scientific work, he said to the ladies. And it's important to see in your work not only the academic component, he says, but also the visual, the paintings, for example, and other works of art that are used as a backdrop for our today's Skype link, says Mr. Maruschak. So, what have been the new developments in your museum? Would you like us to say to describe the project? No. What happened after the initiation of the project? Says Mr. Maruschak. And the experts from Novoaidar, they say probably it's Ms. Bozhkova, the director of the NovoaidarRegional Museum. She says that the number of visitors grew, and they were visited. The museum was visited by also the local teachers. They visited all the parts of the museum, all the expositions there. And now she says that after the road conditions have improved, because the climate conditions didn't allow long trips, the museum is going to be visited by the school students. They were informed of that. One group of children already visited the museum yesterday, and they made a number of photographs that you could see here, and they liked what they mentioned they liked specifically was the interactive style of their communication. And they left a number of, testimonials of their visit to the museum. There was another interesting case yesterday. There was a visitor who said that, I just had some spare time. What can I see? What's best to look at this museum? And he spent, you wouldn't believe it, but he spent more than 2 hours in our museum. And that visitor and the other visitors, they thanked us for our exposition at the museum and for the research that we have done in terms of how our region was populated. Why some people speak Ukrainian language, the others speak Russian language in our region, yet the others speak the so-called Surzhyk, which is a mixture of Russian and Ukrainian that is typical for a lot of areas of Ukraine. Mr. Maruschak continues asking a question about the result of the project. Are you satisfied with the result? Asks Mr. Maruschak. Yes, the answer is that yes, both ladies said that they were very much satisfied, and they are going to amplify, so to say, the number of visits and the effect that the museum produces. They develop new routes for the tourists, and the management, rather the local authorities, they sponsor and they promote their efforts, the efforts of the museum, because they saw the improved results, and they mention the fact that they are going to renew the shop, the craft, the sewing craft shop in the museum, and Ms. Bozhkova said that some of the visitors even said that their museum is not worse than the best European museums. We live in a rural area, and we do not have a lot of visitors, for example, on weekends, as they do have in large urban museums. But still, we started receiving phone calls from the neighboring towns and even from Kiev, and people were interested to see the embroidery and these clothes that you could see exposed here in our museum. So our museum has been improving, and we are thinking of improving the amenities in our museum. For example, making sort of a coffee shop or a tea room or something. Well, we can, Mr. Maruschak says that we can support that idea too. You could just write your business proposal. And Mr. Maruschak continues by saying that your success, the success of your museum, is emblematic and could be a good example for the other museums in terms of other artistic projects. And Mr. Maruschak says that some of the museums didn't tackle the new workload, so to say, well enough. But Ms. Bozhkova said that we visited last year the Artistic Arsenal, the museum here in Kiev, and they are thinking about the expanding the part of the museum dedicated to the natural resources of and ethnographic resources of their region. We also want to improve and to enlarge our exhibition of paintings and other fine arts. We were approached by a number of painters and who offered their collections, and one of the goals of our project is to improve the relations, the interaction with the community, so that both our collection in our museum is enriched and also the cultural life of the local community is enriched too. Mr. Maruschak thanks Ms. Bozhkova and her colleague for their participation in this link. And Mr. Maruschak reminds us that it was that these were the ladies from the employees of Novoaidarsk Museum, and he said that even his first visit to that museum was a very interesting experience. When they came there, there was a very interesting exhibition there, and it was on St. Valentine's Day. And for Mr. Maruschak, it was sort of a discovery. And Mr. Maruschak invites Ms. Bozhkova and her colleague to visit UCMC and to have a look at the results of their cooperation. And now Mr. Maruschak continues offering us a link with the Memorial Museum, the estate of Nemirovich-Danchenko and Korf, the personalities important for Ukrainian culture, and Korf was important as a education personality, very prominent figure in pedagogical science. And So, for you to understand better the personality of Korf and his concepts of education, he started as religious upbringing as a foundation for education, for secondary education, but he changed that, altered or transformed, so to say, this system into more lay system, lay values-oriented system. And so now we have the Neskuchne township representatives here. They are the employees of the museum of Nemirovich-Danchenko and Korf. And Mr. Maruschak emphasizes the significance of the museum for the Ukrainian educational system. The processes that are underway in Ukrainian educational system have been important, he says. We have been supportive of the educational reform in Ukraine, but have we really been interested in what exactly children or have children been studying in Ukrainian schools? And today, Mr. Maruschak emphasizes we live through an educational reform, for example, in the primary education system, and the emphasis there is for the school pupils to be taught how to be responsible for their decisions and so on. And Mr. Maruschak says it would not be an exaggeration to say that an important aspect of that education reform has been, or was rather, initiated at Neskuchne, which is a small, fairly small township in the east of Ukraine. It's Donetsk region. And he asks the ladies, for example, Maria Glushko, the head of the director of this museum, to describe the changes that there have been since the initiation of the project. Well, there have been a lot of changes. More people started visiting our museum after we initiated, or since we have initiated this Project Phantom. Some people were reluctant to share their mementos, their photographs and similar things with the museum when we asked them to do that. And after we completed our, exposition, a lot of them, having seen the final results, so to say, they started saying that they would also like to see their photographs exposed in that symbolic tree that we put in here. What else? We have become more confident about our work. We believed in our capacity and ability to do things. We have already had 5 events. We have managed to involve a number of representatives of not only our oblast, but also of Luhansk Oblast. And we were visited recently, or we have been visited by a number of representatives of the other museums from all over Donetsk Oblast. We are now preparing the Korf readings that will be dedicated to 185th anniversary of Korf's birthday. After that, we are or rather, in conjunction, we plan also to make the renovation of our premises. Thank you, Ms. Maryna. And I didn't say that didn't mention the fact, or haven't mentioned the fact that the museum's exposition dedicated to Korf, it was opened in a small, storage house that was an annex to the building of Nemirovich-Danchenko's museum. And I recommend the Ukrainian education experts to notice that the building was remodeled so that, for example, the lavatory that was not inside the premises, it was then probably relocated, and the school building that was nearby was also remodeled and remade into a residential house for the museum employees. And that museum was gifted. The premises for the museum were gifted with the idea that there will be a Korf museum in those premises. And I even remember a photograph with one of the employees nailing a small plate with the inscription, "There will be a museum here." And Mr. Maruschak said it was very good and positive. Your efforts have been very good and positive because the museum was indeed opened, renovated, and sometimes some of the, artifacts in some other areas can be transferred into the property of the museum in very bad condition. And you also had that, decrepit premises, but you managed to renovate them. I remember that during a presentation, you got me you presented me to your local rayon head, and he was fairly supportive of the plans to renew, to restore somehow the museum facilities. And I remember the opening ceremony, and I thought that the number of people was emblematic and a good illustration of the interest of the local residents, even rural residents, towards the museum that a lot of people would associate mostly with some, culture, urban culture. And I'm sure that you would also succeed in making this full-fledged pedagogical museum dedicated to Korf. You wanted to add something, as I gather. Yes, after we have opened this Phantom museum, we are not going to stop our work. We are going to continue, and we would like to use this opportunity for thanking you. Well, we support you not only because we like you, but we also understand the importance of the processes that are taking place in your area, and therefore, as we are driven by the desire to develop what we call the Ukrainian pedagogical pedagogy, we would like to continue our efforts aimed at developing your museum. Let us continue. We can now move to another museum. And in 2015, says Mr. Maruschak, we started visiting some areas of Ukraine because, and we understood that we didn't know Ukraine well, and we discovered a lot of areas, a lot of realms in which we wanted to work. And now we can speak about the Museum of Forest, so to say. It was created at Grafske township in Donetsk region. The idea in the 19th century, when the forest was planted there, was to explore how would forests help in making more favorable the climate conditions in the steppes that were quite dry and inhospitable sometimes, said Mr. Maruschak. There were, for example, sandstorms in summertime, and so they decided there at Velykanadolsk to make a forest, to plant a forest, and study, examine the effects. So, this whole realm of exploration was initiated, so to say, there at Grafske, and as the museum premises were constructed inside that forest, and there was a sort of a observatory, academic observatory constructed there with the purpose of climate research. So that museum was founded long ago, but it has been functioning since that time, and now they have a project. They initiated a new project which is called Ecological or Environmental Observatory. We are now going to have Miss Olena linked to us via Skype. We cannot yet reach her, but in the meantime I can tell you that that museum has been maintained through nearly heroic efforts of its employees, because it has been it has even developed or created 3 branches, and they have had to work oftentimes with no funding, no support from the local authorities, and but they have managed to perform their main function, to preserve the collection that they had and have in their museum. We have Miss Kashenets now linked to us via Skype, and Mr. Maruschak greets her and says that we would like to discuss with you the implementation of the project that you have implemented in your museum. Have there been any changes since you have completed the project? Are you happy with the results? Ms. Kashenets says that she wants to thank Mr. Maruschak for the support and assistance. The project was completed and the presentation ceremony took place on February the 19th. You know that there have been, that the project covered a number of locations, and it was a success not only for in terms of covering such audiences as students and school children, school pupils, but also we had one of the purposes of the project was to present something interesting to the families. For the family visits, make our museum interesting for the family visits. And we now have indeed a growing number of school children who are coming in growing numbers to our museum. So thank you, Mr. Maruschak, for your support and for this success among the school children and school pupils. Now, as we are in a fairly remote area, we hope that after the snow melted and the roads will be more passable, we will have the increasing number of visits from the schools of our rayon, of our district, and from all over Donetsk region. Therefore, I invite you all to visit our museum, and our ecological or environmental observatory is working all year round, and we are planning to hold all year through some interesting events for different age categories, and we have developed different events for different categories of population. And as children might not have enough time to dedicate a lot of time to visiting our museum, the other categories of population could also be, so to say, oriented and attracted to our museum, oriented to visit it. Mr. Maruschak says he wants to tell us more about the project. The project was not, its aim was not to change the museum itself. The museum was preserved, but 6 observation stations were opened, and as at the beginning of the project and after its completion, even for the participants, for the school pupils who would like to participate in any of the projects and research projects in this environmental observatory, a jackpot, so to say, is an electronic microscope. Therefore, for the children finding themselves in the Museum of Forest and having as an award an electronic microscope, it certainly is a lucky strike, could be a lucky strike. They perceive it as such. Thank you again, Ms. Kashenets, and I would like to thank you again for your hard work through that period of lack of funding, lack of support. In the nearest future, we would like to visit your museum once again, because for me, says Mr. Maruschak, it's going to be an opportunity to see it when it is warm, not winter time. Mr. Maruschak says he wants to emphasize that there is a number of programs now implemented in Ukraine on how to support the Ukrainian culture. For example, the Ukrainian Cultural Fund or Foundation, which offers some granting, financing. And so he invites Ms. Kashenets to participate in the bids and contests aimed at winning some other funding, some additional funding. Mr. Maruschak says that he invites he wants to conclude probably our travel, so to say, virtual travel around the Donbass by saying that we have visited the northern part of the Donbass, the southern part of Donbass, its central part. So we've been into an industrial part of Donbass, but now as our last part, so to say, is a museum that is the Pokrovsk Historical Museum, and it's also in Donetsk region. It's the project, again, the museum development project there, and the topic was quite interesting and important for the museum. It was it's the composer Leontovich exposition that they wanted to create in the course of this project. Leontovich was originally from Vinnytsia, and the project dedicated to him, the project was planned as the Leontovich's heritage aimed project. And I wanted to ask Ms. Angelina Ryzhkova, the director, of whether anybody else, any other personalities of the area could be added to that part that's dedicated to Leontovich. The museum employees make researches, they investigate different aspects of cultural life, cultural heritage of Pokrovsk. Because Pokrovsk did not only want to have this, to keep this image of a purely industrial town. It was indeed, and it has been indeed, a coal mining area and center. But should it be limited, should this town's image be limited to a purely coal mine-related sort of image? I'd say that the historical museum employees have been very active in, developing this new image. They've been very active in developing the museum, and as we can see, Ms. Angelina Ryzhkova here, Mr. Maruschak wants to start by thanking her for her work. Because, proceeds Mr. Maruschak, in the conditions in which the cultural realm in Ukraine exists, it's been quite difficult, as we know. What has changed since you presented your project? Are you happy or not, or is it just another burden? Well, traditionally, I would also like to start by thanking you, says Ms. Ryzhkova. I would like to join in the words of appreciation and thanks that have already been expressed by the previous participants. It's been a tremendous experience for us. In the last 2 months, we have not yet thought of anything else except for, or besides, this project. Because, as you said, the residents of the town wanted to add different new aspects to our industrial town's image. Indeed, that link to Leontovich as a famous composer was important and is important, and so we wanted to amplify, so to say, this cultural aspect and link Leontovich's image to the other cultural realms. Because there were these stereotypes, practically already at the level of stereotypes, the industrial city with very limited cultural heritage. We developed our exposition dedicated to fine arts and paintings, and certainly that part that was related to composer Leontovich. We also have dedicated a lot of effort to show the history of the development of our whole area, how the railway station was constructed here, how the industrial facilities started to be constructed around it, and so on. And certainly the part related to Leontovich, who was a prominent composer. You mentioned this prize of electronic microscope that stirred a great deal of interest of the visitors, especially young visitors. But in our museum, as in many other museums, regrettably, we didn't have these similar prizes, but your assistance was very conducive to the success of our project. It contributed a great deal, and as we have seen the implementation of a number of projects in our area. We have seen 7 projects. All of them have been completed. We have been watching these developments via Facebook. We even visited, my colleagues and me, we visited a number of presentations of the other projects. Mr. Maruschak says that thanks Ms. Rashkova, and says that your project has been a success, says Mr. Maruschak, and he invites Ms. Rashkova to visit UCMC and to he invites all the museum employees to be more active, to be more mobile. Do you want to add anything? Asks Mr. Maruschak. Yes, says Ms. Rashkova. There was a brief anti-vandalism action in the course of implementation of our project, she said, and we managed to preserve, despite an act of vandalism, the conductor's wand, so to say, of of composer Leontovich, and so that was topical for us, says Mr. Shkova. But it was, on the other hand, it was a good opportunity, for some information, for the outburst, so to say, of information dedicated to our museum and its efforts, and that composer's stick that was used by Leontovich was indeed compared by some media to a magic wand of Harry Potter. Mr. Maruschak says, I want to add that there was a monument to composer Leontovich opened last year in Pokrovsk, and unfortunately someone broke the stick of the conductor's stick that had the monument of Leontovich embodied in that monument had in his hand. But as Mr. Skova said, even that fact of vandalist act against that monument provoked the interest, some growth of interest on the part of the local media, and thus the growing attention to the project. Mr. Skova adds that this project dedicated to what we call the cultural code of our region is only the beginning. We consider it to be the first step, and since the time of your workshop that you held here, 10 more project proposals were written, and the Ministry of Culture revised them. They were presented to the Ministry of Culture. 6 of those 10 projects were from Pokrovsk. So we hope for some more support, some more assistance. Thank you, Ms. Angelina, for your work, and I'm really sincere in my appreciation and in our support. Let me thank you. And here at Ukraine Crisis Media Center, we have a representative from the Ukraine Culture Foundation, and I would like to give her the floor and invite her to speak to the representatives of 32 museums that participate in this link, mostly from the eastern part of Ukraine. I would invite you, as the representative of the Ukrainian Culture Foundation, to visit our website. We have 2 more grant proposals offered, and one of them is related to cultural heritage, which can be used by the museums. And national cooperation is required there, and the cooperation with a regional partner is also one of the requisites of those grants. The deadline for project proposals is the 22nd. In the territory of Mustetsky Arsenal, which is a local art museum here in Kiev, you could find our representatives, and it's been very interesting for me to hear the future plans, what the future plans are for a lot of museums. And although we do not have any funding for the new cultural projects for the next year, I hope we could accommodate some more applications. I understand that the preservation, and not only preservation, but also the research of the cultural heritage is very important for the museums in their work. And so until the 22nd, we are ready to accommodate the proposals, the project proposals from the museums in this aspect. And Mr. Maruschak emphasizes that it's good and probably the most important thing about our work, that some of the museums in Ukraine got funding. And understandably, he continues, they need further assistance, and the Ukrainian Cultural Foundation is an organization that has spent a large budget, huge budget, for the support of the development of cultural heritage in Ukraine. And I hope that all the obstacles could be overcome by us. And Mr. Maruschak wants to express to Ukrainian Crisis Media Center his appreciation, and he stresses the fact that it's the platform for the discussion of the existing problems and the projects that we have worked on in this Under Reconstruction Museum Open hashtag, so to say. We have been working on that since 2015, and we have, in the course of our today's discussion, how even small-scale projects manage to improve the situation in the museum business, so to say, in the east of Ukraine. And how they contribute, the museums themselves contribute to the development of humanitarian realm in Ukraine. I would like to thank UCMC, says Mr. Maruschak, for your assistance, and we invite you to visit us. We will be visiting you, he says, and everything's going to be all right, says Mr. Maruschak in conclusion of his presentation.